Morning, brethren. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 5. Mark covered some of the details of things I had rushed through a little bit, which is always helpful and nice. But we are going to kind of quickly talk about the war against the Philistines that David had. And I really want to discuss that in the context of David's larger goals. Because I think we see all of these events that are happening, the capture of Jerusalem, the war against the Philistines, the recovery of the ark and bringing it into Jerusalem, all of these shouldn't be looked at in a vacuum. They're part of a plan that David has to centralize and solidify the nation as a whole. And so we've already talked about that some when 2 weeks ago we looked at why he was even capturing Jerusalem at all. There's, of course, the reason that it's on the list. It's one of the cities that they were supposed to have captured and people who were supposed to be judged by God. But there were others besides Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem and why then? It's because he needed a good, more centralized capital that was not yet a part of any of the 12 tribes. David doesn't want to be king of Judah plus some other tribes. He wants to be king of Israel as a whole. So you talked last week about the implications of David multiplying these wives, and I like that you went back to Deuteronomy and looked at what the kings were supposed to do. There were maybe some beneficial reasons why David would want to take these wives into his household, and certainly it was considered an honor for those women and very likely gave them a better life than they were going to have otherwise. It's not too many better lives than being in the king's house. That being said, it still does kind of stand in opposition to that command to not multiply wives. I don't know what else to call that other than multiplying wives. It seems like after every couple events, we have a break where more of David's wives are mentioned. And there are some consequences to that later on. Right now, it's just showing how his power is growing, showing that things are progressing. But there's going to be some real issues with this many wives and this many children that have problems for the succession, the inheritance, who's going to become the next king. And then we see that Solomon learns the exact wrong lessons from these, and he multiplies wives in a way that would make David blush. So, okay, starting in verse 17, we see the Philistines hear of David's successes and that David is uniting the whole nation. And when they hear this, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had spread out in the valley of Rephaim, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand?" And the Lord said to David, "Go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand." So a united Israel is an extreme threat to the Philistines. That should not be hard for us to see or understand. Excuse me. The Philistines were kind of loosely organized. They had these 5 kings who ruled 5 different cities, and we talk about them as if they were a monolithic block, and they really weren't. They were a loose collection of tribal leaders, basically. Not all that dissimilar to how Israel was up to this point. Israel was really these 12 different tribes that, yes, with Saul had a king, but there was still a lot that separated them. Now David is making moves to make this one large nation that is going to dwarf anything the Philistines could be or do. So the Philistines immediately prepare for an attack. They need to take care of David before this gets any worse. And the choice of the valley of Rephaim is not arbitrary at all. It's the attack point right between Judah and Benjamin. So this is way at the south of the new nation, and it's forcing David to turn his attention south. If they are successful, then they can undercut David's role. They can get David concerned about southern Israel problems and not northern Israel problems. This is going to be a test to see, will the northern tribes even care about what is happening to the southern tribes? All that sounds a little crazy to us. We think, man, if one state in America were attacked, of course all of the states would care. But that's because we are, in theory, a united nation, a united, we view ourselves as Americans first, generally, rather than citizens of whatever state we are a part of. That's a pretty new thing in Israel, and probably still a lot of people in this nation, in Israel, view themselves as members of their tribe first, and then Israel second. So by creating a uniquely southern problem, they're forcing David to act like a southern ruler and to rally the southern tribes around him. This could be an easy opportunity for the northern tribes to say, okay, this isn't our problem. We don't care about any of this. We'll let them take care of themselves. And if that sounds kind of bogus to you, that's basically how it went during the whole book of Judges. Those things did not happen to Israel as a whole for the most part. They were isolated attacks against various tribes, against various corners of the nation, and actually a lot of those judges overlapped for that reason. So David immediately sees the threat, and he inquires of God, shall I go up against the Philistines? David's off to a very good start here of asking God what he should do, and God says, yes, I will give them into your hand. So how did the battles against the Philistines go? We've got this first battle here. What happened? Yeah, Steve. Yeah. David defeated them there, plowed right through them. It's the way David says it is, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood. That doesn't sound like a hard-fought, difficult battle that took a long time to determine who even the winner was going to be. That's a flood that washed away the Philistines, and this was a very easy thing for David to win. And David appropriately gives God the glory for that. What other noteworthy thing happened in that first battle? Yes, Lisa. Yeah. That is left a little open-ended, isn't it? And it's not unusual for them to take those kinds of things as spoils of war, put them up as trophies or melt them down, and or it might not have been gold, but use the materials from it, whatever those materials might have been. But yeah, we are left with a little bit of a lingering question as to, is that what they did with it, or were these taken back and used? And you might think that's insane. Why would anybody take those back and worship them when clearly they couldn't help the Philistines win? Well, yeah, get in line for the weird things that Israel does. They do lots of weird things like that. And we know that idolatry is pretty much a constant problem in this nation. In David's reign, it's at its lowest, I would say. But that doesn't mean it's entirely gone. So probably it depended on just who exactly grabbed those things. But yeah, I've got the same kind of question you do. Okay.
First Chronicles 14:12, did they burn the idols?
Good. So First Chronicles 14:12, burning the idols. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, in this text, the King James translates it as burn. But when you do a word search, there are better words for burning something. And it's really
And what is most likely is that, being left a little open-ended like this, is that you have different people doing different things. Probably they are generally rejecting these gods. But we also know that all throughout Israel's history, somehow they've got these household idols just everywhere. They're common. And so where are they getting them? Maybe in situations like these. Maybe in making them themselves and buying them from the nations around them. I don't know, but somehow they've got these constantly. And I don't think they're filling up some dusty warehouse somewhere. Like it's an unusual kind of obsession with these idols. That maybe first this is a spoil of war, a trophy of the God that we defeated, but then over time can become, a hindrance to them. We have a second battle because the Philistines do not give in. Beginning in verse 22, it says, "They came up yet again, spread out in the valley of Rephaim, and when David inquired of the Lord," which he's doing again, very good, David, God says, "You shall not go up. Go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear of a sound of marching on the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself, for then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines." Why has God changed strategy here? Changed what he's commanding David to do?
Maybe to keep the Philistines confused.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't have a really good answer for that, by the way, as to why. More of the important thing here is that God changed his mind about what David should do or had a different approach this time, and David totally went along with it. David accepted that. He didn't argue with it. He didn't complain. He didn't say, well, last time all we had to do was just go up against them and you gave us victory. How come this time we got to go around and we got to wait and we got to do this whole more complicated thing? But we do that with God sometimes. We want to know all the reasons. We want God to explain himself to us. We want everything to be just like I'm in charge, and that God has to justify his commands to me. If you are a true servant of God, then you know that God doesn't have to justify his decisions or his commands to anyone. When he says do it, you do it. If it doesn't totally make sense to you, you do it anyway. That's what it means to serve God. He has perfect judgment. He doesn't need to be questioned. There is no benefit in questioning him. Be like David here and go along with whatever it is that God has told you to do. And so David is obedient here as well. And what is the end result of this battle? Drove him back. So he struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. So a huge success here. And as I said, I want us to think about this not just in terms of, the historical battles. Sometimes when studying history, we jump from battle to battle, from crisis to crisis. But even though these are books of history, they are not just books of history. They are given with theological points, given with themes in mind to help us to understand some important things about David, about the nation, about God. So there were many other battles that aren't listed for us in these historical books. So the inclusion of these helps us to see things like David is fulfilling his purpose as leader over Israel. Remember when the Israelites wanted Saul to be king, that their reasoning was they needed someone to protect them from outsiders, to protect them from these people who would come in. The Philistines would very often raid and attack and oppress, and they'd have these intermittent troubles with the Philistines and with others around them. That has not ended just because David has become king, But now they have someone who is successfully able to repel those invaders. And Saul did that for a while too. But Saul had less success with that over time as God was no longer with him. And so Israel had fallen back into the oppression of the Philistines. And there were some serious problems that they had to deal with because of that. So David's fulfilling his purpose, his physical purpose for sure. But he's also growing into this role of king very well. And we shouldn't be surprised, because David was already doing these sorts of things before he became king, in having success against the Philistines, in protecting the nation of Israel from invaders, of asking God what he ought to do. David was showing those traits of leadership, godly leadership, before he was even formally put into the role of king. Anything through the end of chapter 5 that you'd like to talk about? Okay. And that brings us to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is kind of infamous. There are some confusing events that happen here for a lot of people. But hopefully in the context of what we've been talking about, it's going to help us to understand that we can get a good, well-rounded picture of this. And still, I want to discuss what's happening here in the context of David centralizing and solidifying the nation. So with that teaser that has half given you an answer, my question to you is, why does David want to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem? Let's back up a sec. Where is the Ark of the Covenant right now in our narrative? It's in the house of Abinadab. Why is it in the house of Abinadab? Kind of random for it to be in a random person's house?
That was the return from the Philistines, wasn't it?
Yes.
When he insulted the god Dagon.
Yes. Okay. So remember that the Israelites had, in the beginning of 1 Samuel, I know it's been a little while, but the beginning of 1 Samuel, they had brought out the Ark of the Covenant like a trump card, like a secret weapon, that it was going to bring them success. They weren't consulting God. They weren't interested in actually obeying what God had to say. They were using the Ark of the Covenant as really a weapon. And they thought that would ensure their success, and that nothing bad could happen to them while they had the ark there. I mean, the mercy seat is on this ark. This is like the throne of God, basically. Yet it is captured, and they lose the ark, which is this shocking thing. And anyone who hears of it is aghast that such a horrible thing could even happen. And we had that whole saga of the Philistines keeping it as a trophy, but everywhere that the ark went, bad things happened. People died, plagues burst out, and it wasn't very long before they said, we don't want this anymore, let's play hot potato, and they sent it to the next city, and it went from city to city for a little bit before they said, before even as it was coming into a new city, they were like, oh no, we've heard about this, we don't want this, don't put that in here, send that right back to Israel. And that's what they did. And even when it went back to Israel, there was still death and a punishment from God because they were treating it lightly, and they were not giving it the respect that it deserved as a holy and sacred object. And so we kind of left it off there as it was put in the house of Abinadab. Abinadab was going to keep it and to maintain it and to give it honor. And we just sort of forgot about that because we've had a lot of things happen since then. We've dealt with all of Saul's reign, and now the mess getting into David's reign. But this whole time, the Ark of the Covenant has still been in the house of Abinadab, which is not its natural place. Where was its natural place before this? Mark.
Well, it was to be in the tabernacle,
Yes.
and we'll see in the next chapter, I think, why David wanted to bring it back.
Yeah.
And I think he's trying to just center, because I think he's bringing the focus back on God. This is part of that, his, his commission.
Yes.
He thinks that, that God is associated with the ark, and it needs to be within the center of power of the king.
Yeah.
If I was to guess, that would be
Yeah.
my guess.
No, I think you're dead on here. That he's bringing the focus back on God, although kind of. We'll get there. But also he has some personal reasons for this as well. That bringing the ark into his newfound capital is going to bring the political center and the religious center together. That was not the case with Saul. Saul had his political center there in Benjamin, and the religious center, where the tabernacle was in Shiloh, although Shiloh was a bit neglected in those days of Saul not really worshiping God as he should, but especially before the ark was lost, when the ark was still there in Shiloh. That was the religious center, and these are two different places entirely. David wants to get the ark back, and that is a good and noble goal. But there is a reason, I say but, I don't really mean to contradict here, it still is a good and noble goal. He has a reason for wanting to bring it to Jerusalem, not Shiloh. That this is going to be a consolidation of his power, and will bring everyone flowing into Jerusalem for all things political and all things religious. So David assembles 30,000 people to make a big show of the ark's entrance into Jerusalem. The mood is very festive with music and celebration. And how is the ark being transported in this first attempt? It's put onto a new cart. That's a perfectly normal way to transport a box. Which is what the Ark of the Covenant essentially is. It's a box. You put it in a cart because it's kind of heavy to carry, and a new cart is going to give it some honor, going to give it not bring dishonor upon it by having some old ratty cart that's about to fall apart. It's a new cart. All was good, right? Okay, what you got?
They're just copying what the Philistines did.
Yeah, that's a good note, that when the Philistines sent it back, that they sent it in a new cart. And again, perfectly normal way to transport a box, if only the Ark of the Covenant were just a box. It does have a particular way that it is supposed to be transported. So we see Uzzah and Ahio driving this new cart that carry the ark. Ahio is in front, and Uzzah then presumably is in the rear. And who are Uzzah and Ahio?
Sons of Abinadab.
That name sounds familiar. Sons of Abinadab. Okay, this is a detail that's lost a lot, right? When we talk about the whole event with Uzzah, we think of Uzzah as just some random guy. Uzzah's not some random guy. He's the son of Abinadab, and the ark has been in the house of Abinadab for a pretty long time. So implications there that Uzzah has really spent his life with the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, don't forget that. That's a really important part of the story that shouldn't be missed. Okay?
It was there 20 years.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to measure that depending on how you take some of the timeline things, but yes, it was there for at least 20 years, and that is enough time for Uzzah to have plenty of exposure to the ark. And what do you think is happening in the house of Abinadab, right? Or what should happen? Yeah, Lisa.
In the house of flesh, God left them, and it's where the ark was.
Right.
It wasn't
Yeah, so for the people who are treating it respectfully, who are God's people, like there's blessing that comes along with it. And I think we can infer that it was being treated well in the house of Abinadab, mostly because the people there were still alive. And they didn't break out in the crazy boils and have the plagues fall upon them. And God had not been particularly shy about doing that with any of the other people who had had the ark, even Israelites who had taken the ark and were treating it disrespectfully, who were very casually handling it. It's been in the house of Abinadab for this long, so obviously it's being treated correctly in this house. Mark?
I don't know. When I read it, I just see it like God is showing a lot of mercy.
Yeah.
Because if putting it on a cart is a disrespectful thing,
Right.
the original text, that was a disrespectful thing for him. It was supposed to be carried with the poles.
Right.
And the Kohathites were not given animals for that because of that.
Yeah.
Because they had to carry everything physically. So, from a technical standpoint, we see God showing a lot of mercy towards the house of Abinadab because I think, it doesn't say, we assume, that they are showing it the utmost respect. I think the overall picture I get is that David doesn't know the law. Because if he knew the law, he would have done it. He was supposed to know the law. Because he's the king, he should be studying the law. And this is something that we see that was neglected overall. Where are the Levites? Was Abinadab even a Levite? I tried to find information on that. It's doubtful that he was. But we see God showing a lot of mercy here. And there's a point where he just is done.
Yeah. Oh yes, there's a lot of mercy that is happening here. We're left with like one of two conclusions, basically. Either Abinadab and his house were keeping the ark well and were treating it respectfully, and therefore, did not face God's wrath. And then we have this incredible blunder and disrespect from Uzzah and Ahio, or it was not being treated well, yet God showed mercy anyway for whatever reasons God has to show mercy upon them for this many years. Either way, it's not great for Uzzah and Ahio. I'm inclined to believe the former, only because the pattern is so quickly broken of God judging everyone who touches that ark and doesn't treat it respectfully. But still, what that leaves us with is that Uzzah and Ahio clearly did not learn the appropriate lessons from having the ark within their house for this many years. So whether Abinadab did not teach them correctly and the ark was being handled too casually their whole lives, or whether Abinadab was able to keep it under control, but really they're only going along with what Dad says, either way, they've not learned the appropriate lessons. Either way, they don't really have the appropriate respect for the Ark of the Covenant, because if they did, they would have said, this is not leaving this house on a cart. As soon as that cart showed up, would have been, oh no, it's not going on that cart. That's not appropriate, that's not right. Let's actually go and see why it's not right, because again, this is missed sometimes. We think about this as a small technicality, and we think, how could God be so extreme about this? Go over to Numbers chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. Numbers chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, says, The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Take a census of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi by their clans and their fathers' houses, from 30 years old up to 50 years old, all who can come on duty to do the work in the tent of meeting. This is the service of the sons of Kohath in the tent of meeting, the most holy things. When the camp is to set out, Aaron and his sons shall go in and take down the veil of the screen and cover the ark of a testimony with it. Then they shall put on it a covering of goat skin and spread on top of that a cloth all of blue, and shall put in its poles. Then over the table of the bread of the presence they shall spread a cloth of blue and put on it the plates, the dishes for incense, the bowls, and the flagons for the drink offering. The regular showbread also shall be on it. Then they shall spread over them a cloth of scarlet, and cover the same with a covering of goat skin, and shall put in its poles. And they shall take a cloth of blue, and cover the lampstand for the light, with its lamps, its tongues, its trays, and all the vessels for oil with which it is supplied. And they shall put it with all its utensils in a covering of goat skin, and put it on the carrying frame. And over the golden altar they shall spread a cloth of blue, and cover it with a covering of goat skin, and shall put in its poles. And they shall take all the vessels of the service that are used in the sanctuary, and put them in a cloth of blue, and cover them in a covering of goat skin, and put them on the carrying frame. And they shall take away the ashes from the altar, and spread a purple cloth over it. And they shall put on it all the utensils of the altar, which are used for the service there, the fire pans, the forks, the shovels, and the basins, and all the utensils of the altar. And they shall spread on it a covering of goat skin, and shall put it in its poles. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary as the camp sets out, after that the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these, but they must not touch the holy things, lest they die. These are the things of the tent of meeting that the sons of Kohath are to carry. Very specific. The transport of these important components of the tabernacle was not slapdash, and it was not arbitrary. It was not just, okay, everybody grab something. Okay, when we moved our stuff over from the old building to here, it was pretty much, okay, everybody grab something. Grab that box, grab that thing, and bring it over here. Didn't have quite that level of ceremony and rigor to it, because, well, those were still, pretty ordinary things. The things that they are moving were holy. The things that they were moving had a very special purpose and were not to be treated lightly. Lisa?
There's also, the leadership has a role and responsibility to go on. God spoke to Moses and Aaron in verse 17, to, basically protect these tribes, tribes not the Kohathites. And then who was supposed to go in and assign, tasks and transportation. But the Kohathites in verse 20 were not even to go in and even look at the holy object for a moment, or they would die.
Yeah.
So everything even had to be covered up with Kohathites.
They're covered up with these special cloths and goat skins, and it was all very rigorous and very specific. And yeah, I noted verse 17 as well, that God says, let not the tribe of the clans of the Kohathites be destroyed from among the Levites. Well, what a crazy thing to say. Let them not be destroyed. You're giving them this honor. You're giving them this special job, yet it feels like God's holding back his anger against them as well. It's because handling what is holy is a really big deal. And that if it's not done right, it will lead to death. Okay?
Well, the first place that they took it in Israel, they set it on a rock. And that's when the people looked into it. The weren't supposed to were killed. So then they had it go to this other Urium, and that was to the house of Abinadab. And then first, they consecrated Abinadab's son Eleazar to have charge of the ark. So that almost sounds like, Eleazar sounds priest-like, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard for us to know on exactly, like Mark was saying, hard for us to know with this family exactly if they're the right ones for this or not. They're the ones who end up being the caretakers of the ark. And so either they were Kohathites and they failed in their duty, or they weren't Kohathites and God gave them some mercy for being the wrong people stuck in this situation. But God's mercy did not extend into just handle the ark however you want. It's too important for that. And I tell you, brethren, if there were an object in my house that, like the previous half dozen stops it had before it came to my house resulted in people dying, I'd be real careful about what I did with it. Okay? Seriously, think about this. Should they not have known the stories of how it ended up in their house? Should they not have had this very clearly in their minds that this is only in our house and not in the tabernacle because so many people before us failed and were struck dead for it? You would think that would put the literal fear of God into them. Yet somehow for Uzzah and Ahio, it doesn't. At least not enough for them to treat it respectfully when it's being transported. So I wanted to give all this context because when we go through the fast version of this story, and the fast version is they moved the ark and they forgot some details, and Uzzah put out his hand and he's struck dead, and wow, that was just so abrupt, and how were they ever supposed to know that it was that serious? They should have known. It was in the law. There's enough precedent in everything that's happened to the ark before this. They should have known. Lisa?
Why I felt like the importance of responsibility of the leader.
Yeah.
They control God for responsibility. I feel like David, as a king, is supposed to know the law.
Yes.
And because he wanted something, and just went about willy-nilly to get it, and he did not take the precautions that he should have taken as a leader, who's responsible for the safety of those people as well as the safe transport and proper transport of the ark.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about that because it's an important point, and you and Mark have both made this point now, that this is a narrative about David, not about Uzzah, really. Okay, Uzzah's a side character in this, and he gets the attention because he's struck dead, and it's a whole dramatic thing that happens. But the main person we are following in this narrative is David, and David has failed here. David has not done his duty to lead this appropriately, to instruct that the ark be moved correctly. And this is why, when we were saying, okay, why did David want to bring the ark into Jerusalem? Well, there's some reasons to want to put the focus back on God, but I think we can see David's maybe a little more concerned right now with his political reasons for doing so. And I don't think that's going too far to say that, because he has blatantly not done what God's word told him to do. And if he were the most concerned with doing things correctly and with obeying God, then this would have been done correctly. Or at least if Uzzah and Ahio were going to do this, it wouldn't have been with David's blessing. It wouldn't have been with all of this pomp and circumstance that David was working up around it. David has gotten a little too focused on his reasons for wanting to bring the ark into Jerusalem, his personal reasons that he has for it. And so this is a failure of David here. Mark?
Yeah, I think the interpreters agree with you. I know in both of the versions of the Bible that I read, both of them say, he becomes distraught over this, and he says, how will the ark come to be? And the to be part is an addition. There's no real word in there, it's just an interpretation exercise. And so we see that when the interpreters of this language is looking at it, they think that this is a David thing.
Yeah. I think that's the easiest and best way to understand what's happening here. And it's understandable to a degree. With all of these goals of centralizing and consolidating that David has, this will be a really important step to get the ark into Jerusalem. It's going to legitimize David's rule even more. It's going to make him more powerful. And every king would want that. But that doesn't justify what he has done here. This is sometimes what we forget about David. He's a man after God's own heart. He is working hard to obey God, to believe in God, to do what he's been commanded to do. But he does make missteps along the way, mostly when he gets a little bit too distracted about the problems he is facing, like when Saul is pursuing him and he gets a little overly scared of that, or the threats against him in his kingdom and his need to consolidate his power. It is a mistake to look at David's life and to say he's a man after God's own heart. He's done everything he was supposed to do, except for that one time with Bathsheba. That was the one time that he made a mistake, and that's it. That's really not true. David does make many missteps over the course of his life, like we all do, and some of them are pretty bad. Some of them he has really just made terrible decisions, and this is one of them. That doesn't invalidate David as a king or even invalidate David as a man after God's own heart, because what makes David different isn't that he lived as close to perfect as a man could be. It's that he always kept coming back to God. That's the real difference with him. Yeah, Lisa.
Well, in the story of Nadab and Abihu, they were kind of set in their position to know their heads with the least of the grandeur. They kept thinking higher themselves than they should have and offered the fire they weren't supposed to offer. They just took it for granted they could do their position.
Yeah.
And you can almost see that at times David fell under the same problem.
Yeah.
Having this new
Right.
responsibility, power, glory, whatever these things, to just do what David wants to do.
Yeah.
And David was a man after God's own heart. David was a man.
Yes. Exactly. And we say, could it be the same David who asked God if he should go up against the Philistines and asked God again if he should go up against the Philistines? The same David that now isn't going to transport the ark correctly? Yes. It is the same David, just like it's the same Danny who sometimes does really well and sometimes doesn't. Okay?
What is interesting to me is the fact that as I was struck dead for touching the ark, that how many times had it been touched? The Philistines took it and put it in Dagon's temple. They moved it to 2 other cities. They finally put it on a cart and sent it back. And then it goes to 2 different places once it gets to Judah. So it's hard to believe that nobody else has touched that ark and not been struck dead.
No, lots of people have touched the ark, and that's why like the boils broke out against them, and I believe it says some of them died as well. So yeah, that does happen with some of them. There's, I think, an extra layer of judgment here because Uzzah really ought to know better. And that does count for something. Alan?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the process of moving that was outlined in great detail.
Yes.
And basically that's the reason why.
Yes.
Whether somebody touched it or didn't touch it or how it was handled from the beginning to the end was not the way God instructed, and that's why it went down the way it did.
Yep, absolutely. What we read in Numbers 4 has been broken here quite blatantly, and there's no excuse for it. Mark?
It kind of reminds me, this is how God's moving with the people and with David. David doesn't just go directly to Jerusalem and take it over. He starts stopping there and then he moves forward. God moves very incrementally, and he's kind of training his people where they need to be. He's very merciful. That's how I see this text. He's
Yeah.
just a very merciful God. You know, if he was this rigorous, horrible God in the Old Testament that people want to make him out to be, he would have been well within rights to just wipe people out all the time. He
Yeah.
doesn't do that because he loves his people. But he's, in my opinion, he's just trying to bring them to this. This is the severity of who I am, and this is the importance of what you're trying to do, and it needs to happen slowly so you'll understand it better. And I really look at the Levites on this as well, and where are they?
Yeah.
Why aren't they going to David and saying, this is how things need to be, David, this is the truth of the matter? They don't know either. This is where they are. This is 320 years after Joshua is gone, and we're seeing a picture of where they are.
So, we identified the leadership in Numbers 4 as having failed for not doing this correctly, and connected it to David, and that's fine. But the leadership really identified in Numbers 4 is the high priest. Why has the high priest not done this correctly? Where are the priests? Where are the Levites? Why are they not leading in this endeavor here? That's suspiciously silent.
Mark brought up, and what you brought up a little earlier, David, when he's going into battle, inquires of God. Why did David inquire of God? Because one time how to get the ark to where it belongs. So that he just,
Yeah.
a lot of things miss
Yeah.
where it should have been.
It's a lapse of judgment. We have them. All right, so David, his first reaction to Uzzah is anger. When Uzzah, not to Uzzah, to Uzzah's death, is anger. That, how could God do this? And then very quickly, his second reaction is fear of how could we do this? And what are we going to do about this? How is the ark of God going to come to me now? Which, as Mark mentioned, is maybe an interesting way to word that. So the ark goes into the house of Obed-Edom, and it stays there for 3 months, and everything's in this odd, precarious position of, okay, do we get to do anything with the ark anymore? Has God rejected David? Is God going to strike David down too? Is there going to be a plague sent over the whole land for this? None of those things happen. And in fact, we see the house of Obed-Edom is blessed, and so David kind of builds up some courage again to try this one more time. But the second time that the ark is brought into Jerusalem, or attempted to be brought into Jerusalem, it's done much better. So it's carried appropriately, and as they've taken 6 steps, then they offer a sacrifice to God. That we are doing this God's way, and we are doing this to glorify God. Thank you, everyone. Next week, I'm gone again. I will be around, some more. It's just my busy season, I guess. So next week, y'all will pick up in verse 16, if that's where... Mark, are you teaching for us again? You are? Okay. So verse 16, if that's where Mark wants to start, or if he wants to go over anything that I went through quickly, that's fine too. Thanks.